My partner's not here. They're having network issues.
Okay.
No, he's here. Yeah.
We'll hold for a minute.
Okay, I'm going to give 30 seconds, then we start the round. Please confirm with your partner that if he's not here in 30 seconds, we continue without him.
No, I'm here. I'm the said partner. I maybe need to change my name, but I'm here.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry about that. Okay. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
All right, cool. I am confirming that you can hear me.
Yes, please, you're audible.
Chair, please confirm that you can hear me.
Yes, please, I could hear you.
All right.
Speakers, if
All right,
you
great.
are unmuted, please mute yourselves. I will not tolerate any interruptions and distractions within a speaker's speech. Thank you very much. Prime Minister, please proceed.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Okay, so this is Zoom. I hate Zoom. So like PAUDC verbally around the 5th minute, please. I'll prioritize from opening just so that, yeah, I guess we can have a nice opening round. If not, I'll take from closing. I'm very happy to do that. Just give me a second to get my camera ready, then I will start. Okay. Cool. I'm going to begin my speech in 3, assuming I'm still audible, I'm going to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. It is, okay, wait, sorry. Okay. 3, 2, 1. It is cool when we are able to watch individuals and we begin to like engage with the content that they push. That's the fun of being on social media. It becomes problematic to individuals at the point at which you base your identity and your accessions to spirituality based on the clicks that individuals are able to gain. We think at the point at which social media becomes integral in the defining of identity in a manner that doesn't align with the way that spirituality ought to look like, we think it is problematic, and the rise is integral in ensuring that we regret it in all of its forms more than proud to propose. A couple of things in clarity that we need to establish before we go any further. Number one, this isn't about regretting like social media in its entirety. Therefore, opening opposition can't run the chat of, look, we don't want social media to exist. We think we're very happy to have social media exist. Where the delta in this debate is what the rise has caused, A, but two, why the rise is something that is problematic and worth regretting. That is where we specifically achieve a path to victory when we show you why that is problematic. Couple of points that we need to establish in framing. Number one, who are social media influencers and how do they engage with social media? Two things here. Number one, these individuals are individuals who have existed within a system that is heavily, okay, am I breaking?
No, please, you're audible.
Okay. Okay. I'm continuing from 128. Apparently speakers can't hear me. Okay, cool. I'm going to continue in 3, 2, 1. A, it's individuals who oftentimes exist within a system that has heavily been hinged on how much click value that you're able to gain. But two, it punishes you at the point at which you don't gain that. That is to say, at the point at which it cares about how many individuals you click or the capital that it provides you, at the point at which you haven't accrued as much, you aren't able to have accrued as much capital, you don't actually achieve that. Why is this too important? What the rise has looked like is A, the pursuit of traction and how much gains we're able to get. But two, it's the algorithm actively being implicit in pushing the sort of things that become popular to individuals. Why do we think this is uniquely problematic? A, okay, I'm pausing again. Apparently, I'm inaudible. Chair, please confirm that I'm audible.
You are audible. Speakers,
apparently
kindly recheck your network. You are very audible.
Okay.
Speakers, please check your connection for any interruptions, please.
Sorry, Chair, can we have 10 seconds to just drop and come back? Because we're struggling to hear.
All right, everyone.
It's quite
30 seconds, please.
Okay. Chair, can I restart my timer, or would you prefer that I continue from 2:13?
Anything you are comfortable with. So sorry for all that.
Okay, it's no problem. Okay, I'll just restart my speech. I cannot. Yeah. Okay. I'll give a second, and then you'll tell me when to start.
Yeah. Speakers, can we please confirm that he is audible? Okay.
Yep, he's audible.
Great. Are all the speakers present still? Yes. Okay. Prime Minister, please proceed.
Okay. I'm going to assume that I'm audible. Right. In that case, I will restart my speech in 3, 2, 1. Social media is fun, or has been fun, at the point at which we're able to gain and listen to the people that we like, specifically because we enjoy the content that they push. It becomes problematic uniquely when those individuals begin to become integral in the way by which you define your identity and your spirituality. We think at the point at which you allow a system to be complicit in the robbing of the way you ought to identify and engage with spirituality, we think that system has failed you. For all of those reasons, we think it is uniquely worth regretting, and the rise has been integral in ensuring that. For all of those reasons, we're very proud to regret in this motion. A couple of things that we need to establish that are very important in clarity. Number one, this debate is not about regretting social media and the rise of social media. We were very fine with social media being existent. We think the debate is specifically around influencer spirituality, and when the rise is problematic. The path to victory from opening government is therefore simple. If we're able to prove that the rise in itself has been inherently problematic and worth regretting, we think we're able to win specifically. But two, note, we are going to show you in principle why this is likely going to be harmful. We think at the point at which closing has to win, you have to engage firstly with the principles justification that we provide to you before we go any further. A couple of things then in terms of context that we need to establish. Number one, what do social media influencers look like, and why is this uniquely problematic? Two things here. Number one, these are individuals who have existed within a system that is heavily hinged on how much clicks you're able to gain or have gained. But two, it pushes or it punishes you at the point at which you don't gain that specific thing. Why? A, you are heavily capitalistically incentivized to push as much content as possible in the amount of time that you specifically need to be able to do that. It means that you're far more likely going to push any single content that is able to gain you clicks or gain you views. I think this is likely problematic, specifically for these two unique reasons. One, what does this rise look like? Or why has it looked like? A, there's more pursuit of traction and what traction looks like over the pushing of spirituality and why that becomes important. But two, it's the algorithm actively becoming integral and continuing this push in the first place. What does the algorithm actively look like? A, the algorithm works off a push-pull factor. In terms of spirituality, it has meant that at the point at which you push a lot of content that is more exposing, it means that A, you likely push content that has to deal with the idea of the spirituality. Note why this uniquely becomes problematic. We think the nature of spirituality is sacred in its existence. Why is it sacred? A, it is integral in the way by which individuals identify. It's integral in the achieving of identity. Why do we think identity is important? We think identity is important because it's the first step by which individuals are able to define their humanity. At the point at which your humanity becomes defined by clicks and views, you are unlikely going to have these individuals care about what that identity looks like for you. We don't think you're able to gain any form of benefit. But two, it looks like commercialization becoming an integral part of that specific rise. Why is this uniquely impactful? One, capital punishes you to the extent where you don't pursue it to its maximum extent.
So at the point at which there is a constant competition within the space of what or how much spirituality and what spiritual content we're able to push, at the point at which you aren't in that competition, you're far more likely going to not achieve the benefits that likely happen there. But two, it means that spirituality becomes beholden to that capitalistic punishment. Secondly, why do we think this is uniquely harmful in terms of social media and traction? The one, it means that spirituality becomes hinged on the perception of those social media views and those
Point.
things. This leads to a host of harms that in uniquely argumentation I'm going to show you. One, commodification of the accession into spirituality. Before I get to that, note the counterfactual on our side that directly deals with that. Without the rise, we think we would have likely had an incentive to no longer incentivize these systems to put pressure on individuals to continue to push harmful or controversial narratives in order to gain as much capital as possible. One, commercialization into the accession of spirituality as an argument. The premise is quite simple. The way social media has benefited individuals, it has benefited individuals who are the most controversial, who are able to gain the most public discourse or public opinion. What is the incentive, therefore? Incentive is to push everything that is able to maximize the utility that we're able to gain as influencers. This is bad because it means that the system grades your benefits based on this. But secondly, you need to be able to stand out, which means you're far more likely going to buy into the commercialist incentive. Why is this uniquely true? Two mechanisms here. One, there's a constant competition for shock value. What does this look like? It looks like inherently being able to push provocative content around what spirituality looks like. So sangomas are able to find a means for them to push things like day in the lives of what that looks like. It means there's a turn-off and a distraction from the intention of spirituality, which is to find a mechanism for individuals to define identity. That's true. It's sensationalism over substance. Second mechanism here. The nature of social media is that it's oftentimes coercive in the way that it exists. Why? Individuals have likely spent a lot of time engaging with you, which means that they're likely going to take everything that you say or most things that you say as gospel. This means two things. Number one, the deeper connection means that there's a deeper incentive for you to buy into the spiritual pushes that these individuals do. Spiritually, this has two unique impacts. Number one, the system in itself becomes complicit at the point to define your identity. Let's protect the time. Deputy will take you. It becomes uniquely, your spirituality becomes uniquely defined based on what this specific individual says that your identity looks like. It means that you're far more likely going to find yourself in situations where you don't want to question these individuals. Why is this uniquely impactful? Number one, you make the system more powerful than it already is, because at the point at which you allow it to define your spirituality, I think that is uniquely defined because you allow it to actively define identity. Why do we think in the counterfactual where the rise didn't happen, you aren't likely going to get this? It means that one, it allows spaces for individuals to be able to exist outside of these prescriptive systems. But two, it means that individuals are far more likely going to question these particular things at the point at which we're able to question these individuals. We don't particularly fall in line with what they say. We're able to define spirituality outside of social media. We're able to find a conduit to define it for us. We think at the point at which we care about individuals being able to define spirituality, we think we are far more likely going to get it at the point at which the rise doesn't happen. All those reasons more than proud.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister, for that speech. We call the Leader of Opposition. Speakers, you are being reminded to engage and also ask in POIs.
Hello, am I audible? Can you confirm if I'm audible, please?
Yes, please, you are audible.
Thank you. I'm just going to use a few seconds to set my timer. Yes. All right, so I'm ready to start. I will take POIs, preferably I'll call for it. You can ask when I'm comfortable, I'll take you. I prefer POI from, I'll prioritize CG. So starting in 3, 2, 1, go. Panel, the rise of influencer spirituality has and is simply the digitization and the democratization of spiritual expression of itself. The question has been, does this diffusion erode religion in harmful ways, or is it the natural evolution of spiritual communities adapting to new spaces in that regard? What government does is that they frame this debate as tradition versus dilution. What will frame it is accessibility versus gatekeeping in that regard. When you weigh where the world, like when you weigh the world where spiritual knowledge is much more monopolized versus where it is shared widely, we think OO clearly wins, and why that is needed for the sustainability of most religious institutions in of that regard. Then first response to OG then on their identity or loss of authenticity claims, right? I think the OG's entire case hangs on the idea that one, influencer spirituality dilutes identity, which destroys religious meaning, and that produces superficial or broken communities in that regard. I'm going to reject this on 3 levels. First one, the principle. We think religious identity has always evolved, and that is normal, not harmful. The entire case assumes identity has been fixed. Notice, identity has never been. We think Christianity has split into Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, and Pentecostal. Islam has Sunni, Shia, and the Sufi people. African traditional religions vary widely across many tribes. None of these identities were lost in that regard. We think what happened is that they were re-expressed in other dimensions. This motion is simply the next frontier of natural religious evolution in that regard. We think influencer spirituality is actually congruent with historical progression and not a deviation from it. Therefore, the law of identity OG talks about is not harm. We think it's the same transformation all religions have, or all institutional bodies in of themselves have undergone for thousands of years in that regard. What then is the mechanism that OG tries to use to prove this? I don't think OG's mechanism is sufficient, because they say, traction. They don't show how traction actually translates into the identity laws, because the claim is that because influencers get traction, people are going to lose their spiritual roots. We don't get how, because why does traction actually equate to identity collapse in that regard? We think there's been a huge logical gap in order to prove that influencers do not force people to abandon religious identity. We think they add interpretations and not erase traditions. And even if there is a change, which is like I'm taking their best case, although they not have that logical gap proven, we think OG does not tell us why the specific change is uniquely harmful compared to every other historical adaptation that religion has undergone already. If there's no mechanism, there is no harm from their side, right? But the other thing is to say is that if people deeply care about their identity, they can actually join factions within that religion and still express or still derive that sense of identity anyway. Influencer spirituality just increases that number of available spiritual communities. If people want depth, tradition, or like those sense of identity, we think they can still like derive it from the factions that are formed or that have formed aggregate in that regard. We don't think they have a case. What then is the exact case from our side, right? Panel. The frame to notice from our side is that gatekeeping has historically excluded marginalized people. Influencers are going to break this barrier. Notice, we think traditional religion has always, for a long time, restricted access, especially for people like LGBTQ people, women, young people, people who disagree with religious hierarchy, people with mental issues, and a lot of people that live in abusive spiritual environments, right? We think what traditional institutions often say is that your questions are rebellious, your interpretation is forbidden, and this particular things you are doing is sinful. You cannot speak here. We think what influencer spirituality does is that it decentralizes this authority. One, in the sense that influencers teach in accessible language. They can break down concepts without judgment. They create communities of even online where marginalized people can actually be expressed in that regard. This provides alternative interpretations that keep this that these institutions actually gatekeep. We think this is a world where people who were previously spiritually homeless finally find belonging in that regard. What is the second claim from our side? We think influencer spirituality has allowed personal expression for people whose lives do not fit these traditional frameworks. Notice, traditional churches, mosques, or temples often expect people to have rigid gender roles, certain family structures, or have some specific moral expectations in that regard. Many people simply do not fit this template. What influencer spirituality does is that it lets them ask these questions. It lets them explore this mindfulness, this healing and meditation, and lets them maintain spirituality without these oppressive structures. what empowers individuals who otherwise would have abandoned religion entirely. On their side, when they gatekeep these religions, people actually abandon them. So if the claim is that you break down religion and people don't get sense of identity, people will not opt into these things because of that socialization that has occurred already. People are now beginning to think out of the box and beginning to explore what they want and their choices. It means that when you gatekeep and make those places rigid, people don't get there. That sense of identity that you preach about, they still don't get because they abandon religion. People don't buy into religion on your side, but on accessibility and on the continuous progression of these people through funding. Before I do that, shoot your POICG. All right, so 3, 2, 1. Yes, so on accessibility, we think there's been a huge funding and reach because influencers democratize who gets to spread spiritual content. Panel, notice traditional spirituality is mostly dominated by people like pastors, imams, priests, chiefs, elders, and wealthy institutions. What you need is a building and a followers and capital and approval from old gatekeepers. What influencers do is to break this. Anyone with knowledge or lived experience can teach. Content is accessible to the poor. Donations become distributed. They can raise donations and stuff like that on like most of these communities, right? Communities grow without needing physical infrastructure in that regard. What this means is that spiritual leadership becomes much more inclusive, right? OG's word protects that monopoly of old institutions. What we do is that we open the door for thousands of new voices in that regard. What is the way up from old O? Notice, OG says they protect purity at the cost of exclusion. The delta is that when you do that, the same benefit you try to give to people, when people feel excluded, they still do not buy into these things, right? So at the end of it all, by doing that same action, you still exclude a large majority of people. And these people are very many, as I've said. Society has already socialized them into much more progressive form. It means that they'll still not buy into religion anyways. That sense of identity, that like sense of identity or that form of religion that you are trying to guard, they still don't get all those benefits regardless, right? We think what we do on our side is to be particularly to allow for the progression, to allow itself, to allow for people to be much more inclusive and for people to derive meaning regardless. If it is meaning, you still allow for like various factions to actually come together to form aggregates so they can derive meaning in that regard. That's why you have a lot of Protestants from like the Orthodox churches. We think we've been able to show on identity how we get that, but also on accessibility and on adding more people, we are able to do that in that regard.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leader of Opposition, for that speech. We call the Deputy Prime Minister.
Hi. Am I audible?
Yes, please, you are audible.
Awesome. Just give me 1 second. I just wanna fix up my notes, please. Awesome. Okay, I don't have a POI preference. You could just unmute yourself and just POI. But please don't badger. If I don't take your POI, I don't continuously ask, but I'll obviously take you when I get to you. Okay, cool. Can I just confirm one more time I'm audible? Because it happened with my partner and he wasn't audible. All right, I'm audible, correct? Hello? Can anyone hear me?
Yes, please, you're audible. You're audible.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Awesome. I will be speaking in 3, 2, 1. Let's understand how spirituality functions. We think that spirituality is based on the idea to be able to deny oneself. How do we know this? We see that there are certain ideas in spirituality that look like prioritizing God, prioritizing ancestors, doing certain cultural rituals that don't necessarily prioritize you as an individual. It looks like going away from sinning. These particular things, and this is important when it comes to spirituality, because spirituality is based on the foundation of one's ability to deny oneself and not to be able to enter into these worldly manners, right? How is this contrary to the influencer spirituality realm? We see that digital culture is based on the ability to base your personal branding on these individual things. Notice that these social media advocates have to be selfish or put themselves in the messaging, in the foundation of this particular thing. That is like very contrary to what spirituality is and how it exists, right? So on a way up, why do we think that it is more important to value the trueness or like the how like spirituality exists rather than adapting it and making the message more palatable for individuals? Number one, we see that if there is a palatability of this particular religion, we see that people aren't actually going to grasp the full understanding of these religions and are unable to engage with them properly, and the people that perform that are actually within these like the religious groups. But also secondly and most importantly, if you make your message more palatable, you actually become more more diverse within these particular groups in the first place. Because when you see individuals such as the Pope that are sorry, when you see individuals such as people like in the Catholic Pope that are being political in certain instances, this ends up dividing the church. We see that when spirituality takes on particular messages or becomes more palatable to worldly standards, it ends up mitigating the message and turning people away from this faith. And we see that as contrary to how spirituality works in the first place. But firstly, I want to give you an argumentation, a very simple chat on like why this is harmful for individuals, right? Let's understand that this is a narrative debate. So we have to ask ourselves 3 questions. Firstly, who is being influenced? But secondly, how influential is this narrative? And thirdly, is there any other narrative that is more influential that should be discussed in this debate? Firstly, let's answer the first question. Who is actually being influenced in this debate? We see that individuals within these spiritual groups are going to be influenced, but the most change that is going to happen and where the debate and where the doubt is where people or like the people that watch these things that are going to be the most changed are people who don't actually know about these spiritual groups in the first place. These are the most coercive people who are not going to know about these spiritual groups because they don't know and they can't necessarily check this information. So if they see Gogos Koteni talking about how to become a Sangoma on TikTok, they're more likely going to buy into that messaging because they don't have access to people that are within these groups around them in their society. It means that the only interactions that they're going to have are going to be these social media influences. Why? Because people from different communities don't necessarily integrate with one another in certain cases, right? But I'm going to prove to you as to why that is better. This is bad for a few reasons. We see that firstly, the narrative shaped by these social media is going to influence how people within these groups are going to be viewed. This is very important because the people outside of these groups are going to have a certain narrative that is actually going to be counterproductive for the movement. We tell you that people such as Gogos Koteni are going to have an incentive to propagate controversial messaging. It means that the people that are going to see this messaging are going to associate people within these groups with those individuals. This is very harmful as well because we see that the vast majority of people who actually participate in this particular spirituality don't even have access to social media. So you get a small minority group of people that are going to be advocating for a large group of individuals. Because when we see people who actually believe in these ideas, these are individuals that live in the rural areas. These are people that are holding their spirituality to a sacred level. They don't share it with a lot of individuals. This is problematic because we see that in the case where they're going to be showcasing these messages, these social media influencers, the narratives are not necessarily going to reflect the vast majority of these individuals. This is harmful because you then create these harmful stereotypes about these individuals within these particular groups, specifically when it comes to minorities. Imagine a certain group of individuals that thinks that people who believe in African spirituality are individuals who are barbarics. We see that's more likely going to happen on their side because they actually incentivize these influencers to propagate harmful messaging to get the traction that they need from social media. So we see that there is incentive, and we think that in order to be rewarded, you need to be more controversial in these social media spaces. They have an incentive, they have the capacity, they have to take those down first to prove as to why it's not influential. Before I move on to how influential is the narrative, anybody can shoot a POI.
One, you're manufacturing harms that absolutely don't exist. But secondarily, none of your harms exist exclusively. Like, are you saying traditional churches are good places where people find actualization and equality? That's ridiculous.
Oh, our chat isn't to say that like this particular space is perfect. What we're you're trying to say is that the influence and the coerciveness of these individuals is that. Because, okay, Rea tries to tell us that there is no harm, but there is. Why is there harm? And this like works well in my argument. So we have to tell you that this narrative is completely influential for 3 reasons. Firstly, it's influential in shaping the perspective of these entire groups. But also, secondly, people can often be coerced by social media, and this is something that opposition has to counter. We see that people spend a lot of time, but also we see that there is a rise of parasocial relationships. We see that people are more likely going to idolize these individuals that they see on these groups more than like criticize these individuals, right? And we see that people are more likely going to co-opt these ideas that they see. This looks like, for example, Obizo, a very like a show that talks about spirituality, has convinced people to buy into the ways that they do Sangomarism and Shisaring in Bepo. We see that people are appearing more and more on those particular shows, and we think that's inherently helpful because it actually infringes on the ability to people to choose how they actually want to express their religion, how they actually want to be viewed in society. Why is this exclusive? And this answers Ria's like POI. It's exclusive. This harm is exclusive to social media spirituality for 2 reasons. Because firstly, it is the platform that is extremely influential. But also secondly, we think that the individuals that are propagating this message are also influential in nature. So therefore, you're more likely going to have people that are co-opting this message that is the harm. That's where it exists. Quick engagement with open opposition. Big strategic flaw. They tell us the problems with religion. They don't actually engage with the rise itself because they tell us that there's going to be rigid gender roles. We don't necessarily see that's important. But even if that's the case, we've already told you as to why it's important to value spirituality. Spirituality deems on the fact that you're supposed to deny yourself. We think that it's better for people to opt into like our counterfactual, where they can be true to religion and not actually go to these modern standards that are not influential. With that,
Thank you very much, Deputy. We call the next speaker to further the case. Thank you.
Am I audible?
Yes, please, you are audible. Hi, if you are speaking, you are no longer audible. Hello? Can anyone confirm if, I don't know where the issue is happening on which end? Can anyone hear the speaker? DLO, if you are speaking, you are not audible. We cannot hear you. Okay, you know what? Let me type it there. Is the partner here? Could the partner contact his partner to know that he's not audible? Wow. Or is it me that isn't audible? I don't know. Could anyone confirm if I'm audible, if the speaker is not audible?
Hello, please, who is about to speak? Is it DLO?
Yes.
Oh, okay, let me reach out to him quickly. Hello, can I be
Hi.
heard?
Yes,
I
please. Please
just
do the
called
DLO.
this. Yeah, this is Elo. I just found out that his phone is off. Can you give us like some minutes?
You have a minute.
Hello, Chair. Am I audible?
Yes, please, DLO, you are audible.
I'm so sorry. My network decided to mess up immediately. I started to begin to speak. But yeah, let me not waste everybody's time. Let me just go straight into the speech here. Okay. So, all right. So let's begin the speech in 3, 2, 1. A couple of assumptions from opening governments that really makes their case weird. First is that they assume that when people just consume social media things or spiritual teachings, they just assimilate it and they began to act the way the influencer said. I think that they know that people mostly act on social media for things like collect values and stuff like that, which means in a vast majority of instances, people are curious and they question most of the things that exist on most of these social medias, which means that they are skeptical about the kind of things that they necessarily implement within their life. But secondly, opening government assumes that people only derive their identity from social media. We don't think it is true because oftentimes people exist within societies that still shape their identity and constantly teaches them what the spirituality opening government wants them to learn necessarily exists. What this means is that most of the impacts that you get from opening government or necessarily how spirituality needs to be at its finest is something that you cannot buy. But the other reason why the opening government case is weird is because notice they do not present any working counterfactual. Because note, all they say is that the right is something that is significantly bad without necessarily showing us what the absence of the rise necessarily is. What we think from opening opposition happens is that absent of the rise, spiritual ideologies do not necessarily disappear from the status quo. We think that what happens is significantly worse on the other side of the house, given that you reshape or you give the power to religious institutions in of themselves to define what is spiritual and what is not. But oftentimes this religious, like this power is something that falls back off of the back of like onto most of the major religious institutions. That is exclusively what you get from Isaac when he analyzes to you how the power when it is held by most of these religious institutions is something that is one, exclusionary, but two, largely detrimental and brutal to most marginalized people. We think that when you open up this space, things like women get to be moral arbiters of religion in that particular regard, something that is largely missing within the other religious institutions and other religious spaces in themselves, right? But another assumption that necessarily comes from opening government is the idea of that, because people necessarily want to operate off of the back of things like click values and stuff like that, they are most likely going to do things like the dilution and misinformation. We think that this is something that's largely untrue. Here are 4 reasons why. The first is that fact checking is always extremely inaccessible feature within today's world for 2 structural reasons. The first is that multiple influencers are constantly going to exist pushing different ideas, which means that there are constant interlocking of truth and misinformation, given that most of these actors also have incentive to necessarily speak out the truth. They never prove why every influencer has like incentive to necessarily lie on their side of the house, giving like that most people are necessarily going to be arbiters of the truth. What this is to say is that most of the harms that you are going to get on both OG and CG are largely limited and marginalized and minimalized. And the reason why this is so is because if there are counter narratives that exist even within this influencing, we don't think that this harm is one that is largely more probable. But secondly, notice that the internet exists to necessarily make things like research much more easier. So if somebody misinforms you, it is easier to identify this. But thirdly, notice that cancel culture exists. What this means is that that people who are largely sought out to be like people who are misinforming people and stuff like that lose things like their credibility that necessarily comes from this. Because notice, when it comes from like things like cancel culture, it necessarily means that even if you generate traction from misinformation, that traction that you generate is one that is largely unsustainable because people opt out of that. But it necessarily also means that one, you get things like public backlash in that particular regard that makes your content something that you don't necessarily like. If it's from CG, I'll take it. But secondly, notice that things like social media regulations mean that people can flag your content as one, misleading. Two, if it actually is, it means that getting your content banned is something that is much more likely. But then secondly, if your content is currently getting flagged, constantly getting flagged, it means that the algorithm that opening government says would exist means that that algorithm wouldn't necessarily work in your favor to push your content to a lot of people. This implies one, the vast majority of people represent these beliefs and these spiritual standards in a much more holistic view. That is to say that they consider most of the factors that necessarily exist, curate their content to necessarily ensure that they are not inherently harming people. But secondly, notice that even if it's not so, that adaptive people who necessarily like adapt most of these things and change stuff are going to do so in such a way that it is positively tweaked in such a way that people like that. Notice that this is something that is not necessarily too different from like what exists within the status quo. I'll get to that. But secondly, on identity, opening government, like I think it necessarily deals with that because notice that they can't say that people just build their entire identities off of the back of like social media engagement in that particular regard. But secondly, on the trueness of spirituality, notice here, closing government shoot.
How would short form videos of 15 seconds surely lead to anyone's life getting changed? And how will you use cancel culture against millions of creators?
Yeah. So, like, listen, there are millions of creators right now, but still, cancel culture exists for those millions of creators. I think that the spirituality is a niche of like content creators in that particular regard. You cannot necessarily say that accountability measures don't exist. But secondly, notice that all the problems they notify on Gov are ones that are not necessarily unique to this particular thing. It is social media problems. If you want to solve things like misinformation and stuff like that, regulate the social media world. We don't think that absence of this right is something that is necessary. Trueness of spirituality. Notice that even the spirituality on God's side is one that is still individually interpreted. The Bible itself is a book that only individuals wrote. Like we are necessarily basing our spirituality on somebody's like thoughts and stuff like that. But secondly, even the interpretation of most of these spiritual texts are done individually. Things like pastors, chiefs, imams. All these people ensure that even the content that we consume within our most church institutions is something that is individualistic. This is to say that that benefit is not something that opening government or closing government can claim, but the change that we cause on our side is necessarily helping marginalized people. On marginalized community group, notice that oftentimes marginalized religious groups are small in numbers, right? Which means, but because of the pushback against religion, they are constantly losing numbers, which means that they stand a risk of things like cultural decay and cultural erosion and stuff like that. But secondly, it means that they lack one means to popularize their beliefs. Two, they lack access to two things. One, influence the policies like within the state necessarily for their benefit. But secondly, they don't even have the space to debunk harmful stereotypes because oftentimes they don't have the ability to tell their own stories. It is these big religions that tell their stories for them and tell you that the African traditional religion is one that is harmful because it is witchcraft. We say that what this social media influencing does is that it gives these people the platform to advocate themselves and tell people that this is our true identity, something that you don't get on Gav. Proud.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Deputy Leader of Opposition. We've come to the second half of the debate. We call the member of government to give us their speech. Here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please, you are audible.
Okay. Just if you could allow me, I'm going to set up a Zoom timer so that I can see it when I'm looking up.
Sure.
Should you have any point of information, put it in the chat space. I have it in front of me and open. Also, just realized this round is being live streamed. Anywho, okay, Michelle, if you could give me a go ahead from DMs, I'm happy to start.
You may proceed.
Sure. Cool. I'm going to start my speech In 3, 2, 1. Please note at the very top of this speech that religion is not synonymous with spirituality. Spirituality is people opting out of religion, opting out of the rigid system that gave them the do's and don'ts on how to please their God. Spirituality was basically individuals going, screw the system. I want to have a personal relationship with the deity I believe in. I want to have a personal relationship, whether it's God, whether it's Allah, all those types of things. Spirituality isn't synonymous with religion. That ought to be put on record. But a couple of things then just from closing government. First is to clarify the counterfactual. It's a regrets motion, so we need to have a discussion on what the retrospective world would have looked like or should have looked like and what we would rather have. We think a world in which spirituality remains a personal relationship between individuals and the gods they worship and their deities, for example, or the kind of these communities that they belong to. This is important because this is exclusively the better explanation for how you opt out of a religious system so that you're not forced into the do's and don'ts of it all. But most importantly, it's usually somewhat community based. You find people who don't go to church but read the Bible, you speak to them, you find individuals who still participate in African traditional religions, you still got to do that. The counterfactual has to be fairly simple. A world in which some spiritual influences exist, but not a world where we have millions of creators as opening opposition consents to. We think there are two metrics by which any team can win this debate, especially government teams. The first is that we need to show you that this rise is counterproductive to individuals finding more fulfillment, finding a better sense of belonging. But most importantly, we're going to show you why these harms are for the most part irreversible. What does opposition tell you? I'll address two of their key issues. Michelle will do the rest. First, they say it democratization of spirituality and leadership, that it becomes more accessible. We're going to show you why it's going to be monopolized by influencers telling you what to do and how to feel and what to buy and commercializing off of your pain, which you find morally reprehensible. The second thing is just a sense of belonging, and why you never truly find that. Michelle and I will argue that spiritual journeys are highly personalized. You cannot copy and paste someone else's spiritual journey and decide that that's going to work for you. It's unlikely going to work. What's going to be worse off is that you're not going to find necessarily a sense of belonging, because regardless of how similar these types of journeys may be, they're highly dissimilar in the way that they make you feel, the way that you think, and the choices that you eventually make in life. What does the rise look like? There are a couple of things under this before we give you two arguments or before I entertain a point of information from closing opposition. So what has the rise done exactly? It's done four things. The first is that it's impacted preaching systems from the religious world. They've become more sensational. They're trying to compete for airspace and for followers, trying to draw people back. You've seen more pastors, for example, on TikTok dancing and doing all those sorts of things, simply because they're trying to appeal to the gaze that has been created on the rise of these spiritual influencers. But two is that more short form content. Michelle and I argue that short form content is unlikely going to give you the spiritual fulfillment that you crave, but most importantly, it's going to leave you dry and hanging, and you'll have to keep doom scrolling over and over again, trying to find that form of fulfillment. So not only do you remain spiritually malnourished, you become someone who's mentally a slave to just consistently doom scrolling. This is worse, because opening opposition says people's lives don't work online, but the kind of thing they're supporting, the kind of thing they don't regret, is a world where people have to consistently be online to feel connected to some kind of higher power deity. Three, it's flooded For You pages with many sensationalized short form content. I asked him a question: if you have a million of them, how do you hold them accountable? He waffled his way through the question, never gave an answer to it. Please note that. But most importantly, they're going to create more positive content. It's going to look more like prosperity gospel. But lastly, it has increased parasocial relationships, and we think that this is the architect of just our world falling apart. Two arguments then, two extensions from closing up. Note so far, the clarification of the counterfactual should work for us, but most importantly, the responses we have to opening opposition should be already working in our favor. But just in case you're not convinced, two things then. The first is why it's counterintuitive idea to spirituality. I've already explained what spirituality was meant to be and why this rise is exactly the complete opposite of what spirituality was meant to do. There are a couple of things under this, more like three. The first is that spirituality was an opt-out for religion to give individuals more freedom to own their relationship to their deities and their gods, to allow people to introspect and allow themselves to read the Bible at their own personal levels. If it's actually just using shrooms, for example, or candlesticks, if it's using, I don't know, a magical bowl or something, Spirituality is meant to allow you as a person to try and find out what works for you, what makes you tick, what makes you happy. What this does, the rise we regret it precisely because it takes that kind of autonomy and freedom away from you. So not only did you take freedom back from the religious institutions that were subjugating you, you are now giving it back to influencers who just want it for money. But that's a second argument on its own. But too much short form content storms people. What this does to people, it's getting you more confused and more susceptible to all forms of manipulation. It's not that the misinformation is true. Let's assume for op's sake that all the information is right and verifiable. What this does is that you have millions of short form content that you can't even verify as an individual. You're not sure what is true or what's not. What's worse is that you end up kind of mixing and matching some types of spiritual journeys, it's like a scrapbook type of situation where you kind of feel just more and more spiritually swamped and spiritually lost. But three, different spiritual sources not explored. So you try and copy other people's spiritual story and you kind of paste it, and then it doesn't work for you. So not only are you an individual that feels lost and opted out of religion, you are now an individual who opted into spirituality but can't control it. Rea, please go, my dear. Closing off. Guys, my time is up. I'm going to have to continue that. Okay, what are the impacts for this first argument? I don't know if you can still hear me. This means people feel more trapped because you opted out of one system and into another. But two, you feel more confused. There's so much content. You're not feeling liberated. Something that should liberate you is now making you feel more and more trapped. Okay. Second argumentation on commercialization of faith. And we think that this is morally the biggest issue in this debate. We say economic exploitation of people's vulnerabilities should be morally reprehensible, just on record, regardless of what it is. This is to say a couple of things. First is that you end up paying for sessions to talk to these people. So not only do they become people who share a journey with you, they become some type of teachers that you must learn from. So you buy candles, you buy books, you buy their spiritual journeys because they have to monetize some of these things. That's bad. But two, influencer hopping, where you go from one influencer to the other if one influencer's ideas or antics do not work for you, thinking that others might help you. But three, it deepens parasocial relationships. So no, spirituality is no longer your own. Spirituality only works if Metembe, for example, is my spiritual guru. If he's not created content on that day, I feel spiritually decline. The impact here, people become more confused. Choice paralysis happens, and people spend money on things that don't work. I'm happy.
Thank you very much, Member of Government, for that speech. We call the Member of Opposition. Member of Opposition. Member of Opposition, if you could speak, if you can speak, if you are speaking, we can't hear you, like at all. We can't hear you, like we really can't.
Rea, maybe try exiting and coming back. Maybe it'll work then.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, please, you are audible.
Okay. Excellent. I will start my timer. Also, sorry, Becky, I literally could not unmute. I don't know why that happened. I will start my timer in 3, 2, 1. The rise of social media spirituality in the 2020s is preceded by the crystal age of the late 2010s. You know, when everyone was getting the crystals from Morocco and claiming that the purple one can keep the bad spirits away and the green one will get your ex-boyfriend back. That era, the crystal age of the 2010s, is preceded by televangelism and the miracle age of the early 2000s. So TD Jakes, Bushiri, and all the miracles bringing people back from the dead that they were performing. We think all the harms cited by both government teams. This includes the cult of personality, the echo chambers, the commodification of spirituality that's cited by opening government, the commercialization of spirituality and influencer hopping, the capitalist incentives that are cited by closing government. All of these harms are entirely symmetrical because these harms are intrinsic to the existence of spirituality and spiritual institutions as a whole. This debate is predicated on who proves the delta and who is best able to analyze the delta. And the only delta in this debate is not how people engage with spirituality. It's not the extent to which people are exploited, but it is who is doing the exploitation. This is how closing opposition is going to win this debate. We think our mechanization of this delta is unique. Some brief responsive work. Becky tries to be sneaky and she says that spirituality isn't synonymous with religion, and there's this major distinction that's contextual to this debate. One, false. We think spirituality is not exclusively religion, but the two are definitely inseparable. But secondarily, we think people use religious texts or spiritual institutions for spiritual fulfillment in any case. Those things still exist. We think those, like monasteries, are still spiritual institutions that are a-religious. Those are always going to exist. I don't understand why that's important. But what's even more important to note, and this is for both opening and closing government cases, is there's just a lack of mutual exclusivity. None of the harms that they prove, they're able to prove exist uniquely with the rise of influencer spirituality and don't exist anywhere else where spirituality does exist. I've proven to you that there are waves of spirituality trends that have come and gone. We are presently in the influencer wave, but more importantly, closing opposition is going to show you why this wave is actually better than the previous one. Some context then. The search for meaning or purpose or the secrets of the universe is entirely universal. That is to say, everyone experiences this sort of emptiness, this void that they try to fill, and we do it differently. What this results in is that people are always going to turn to religious or spiritual institutions. People are always going to relinquish their autonomy and their reasoning capacity to religious leaders, spiritual influencers, religious institutions, because they believe that those people have more power, they bring them closer to God or the universe or whatever the hell. So that means this relationship is inherently exploitative. All the way from the monasteries of the Buddhist monks to the spiritual influences of Instagram, the relationship is inherently exploitative. We think what we ought to analyze is which version of this relationship enables people to A, call out that exploitative nature, B, move away from that exploitative nature, but C, marginally actualize a little bit better. First, substantive push from closing opposition on the democratization of spirituality. Opening government tells you that opening opposition rather tells you that influences spirituality, democratizes spiritual experience. Here are some unique extensions from closing opposition. One, we think that this democratization effectively results in a dilution of monopoly on spiritual legitimacy. That is to say, who people imagine when they think of a spiritual leader begins to evolve. We think that trickles down into how people engage with traditional spiritual institutions. We think people are likely to react with more skepticism, and that's overall a good thing. But secondarily, we think there's a higher rate of evolution or change in understanding of how spiritual texts and experiences are interpreted. That also is a good thing. Thirdly, we think there's a diversification of spiritual leader archetypes. This evolves to include women, to include Black people, to include queer people. Two impacts of this that are unique from closing opposition. The first is that you break traditionalist echo chambers and you divorce from Puritanism. But secondly, you encourage skepticism of traditional religious and spiritual institutions. Second substantive push here. And this is on all these economic conversations that have been had throughout the debate. We think the way that current traditional religious and spiritual institutions exist is that they collect their funding through donations, through tithes, through offering, and this money is typically spent on pastors or leaders' salaries, purchasing properties, funding missions to, go to the villages and preach, or go to the villages and teach people, that sort of thing. And in the instances of wealthier spiritual groups like Hillsong or Potter's House, they often tend to fund political campaigns. We think what this does, the consequence of this is twofold. One, congregants end up spending money on things that are far removed from them, so they don't see the immediate benefit. There's a lot of dissonance and dissatisfaction in this relationship because they're pumping money in and they're not necessarily seeing the direct result of that. What do spiritual influences do to this relationship that is fundamentally a paradigm shift? The first thing is that they often sell products. That means that congregants or followers online are able to form a more direct relationship to the money that they're spending because they have physical, tangible products to point to. Secondarily, there are millions of influencers, as Becky cites in her POI. So you can't concentrate the wealth in such a way that you're able to ultimately achieve the same level of harms that traditional organizations do with the money that they have, like lobbying for Trump, for example. Thirdly, all interactions with these spiritual influencers are largely online. That means that they're trackable. There's a paper trail. That means that in the event that you want to hold them accountable, you can post screenshots, put them on blast, cancel culture will do the rest, or you can take those screenshots, form a case, go to court. We think there's definitely a paradigm shift in the way that people engage with their spiritual leaders when they do this online as compared to when they do this traditionally. But thirdly, then, and I think that this is more important, we think that when people engage directly with individuals, not only do you have higher levels of accountability, but closing government is trying to prove a sense of fulfillment and a sense of actualization in the spiritual experience. We think that ability to connect with individuals is much better. Why do we think it's important to move the power and the concentration of wealth and the monopoly on spiritual legitimacy that manifests in wealth from old white men to a wide range of female, queer, and like Black influences online? A, because we think it results in less harms. Second, because we think it challenges traditional archetypes. Third, because we think the economic harm that is perpetuated by traditional institutions is effectively reduced. Vote CO.
Thank you very much, Member of Opposition. We call the whip. The government whips sum up the case on the government bench.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please, you are audible.
Okay, let me just open up the chat. Please drop your eyes in the chat. I'm like looking at it. So I should be able to take your PI. Just don't unmute it right. Okay, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. There's a reason why the good life is difficult to access. It should be difficult to access. It should require insane levels of introspection in order for you to become a good person that's genuinely living a life, maybe like in line with the life of Christ. Like this is something that Becky tells you is extremely important and not something that you're able to ensure happens just by like having short clips, because obviously the rise would mean you need shorter clips for more people to engage with your content. I think like physics is a difficult subject to master, but MIT doesn't make it easier just because it wants more people to join and pay school fees. Access is not like something that's valuable if it's not access that matters. If it's not access that's genuinely changing your life, making you a better person and giving you access to all the spirituality, all the like, you know, solace and hope and everything that you would get access to after you choose to give your life to whatever like higher power you believe in. I think that's extremely important. The problem with op teams is they create a problem and assume that this problem would not be otherwise solved in the counterfactual. I think Becky is very clear. It's reasonable to assume, like opening government says, that the counterfactual would be organized religion, but it's also reasonable to assume that the counterfactual would be spirituality, especially because spirituality existed as a response to religion. Like you can't just get from CEO that this is not true. It's true. Spirituality isn't organized. We don't have doctrine. We don't have moral code. You don't have religious leaders telling you how how to worship, whether to go for mass or go for service. You're not told how to live a good life. You're not told what it means to be Catholic, what it means to be Christian. That's why spirituality existed. It was a direct response to organized religion, moving away from being Catholic or being Anglican and choosing to have a personal relationship with God. So everything that opt-ins talk about in terms of like groups like women and members of the LGBTQIA community still accessing hope, still accessing a relationship with God, they can do that through their own personal prayer and relationship with God in their bedrooms. We've seen this as an alternative to organized religion. It's ridiculous to say that there's no difference between spirituality and religion. Just by saying that, opt-ins are out of this debate, because the reason they're arguing the entirety of their cases is because they believe these vulnerable minority groups need some sort of solace and access to religion. They can still access God and access hope and comfort that comes from that through prayer and a personal relationship with God. Something that they take away when they bring about influential spirituality, because this is obviously something that's revolving around a particular figure. This person is telling you to buy certain things in order to be spiritual. He's telling you, I live my life this way, so for you to be a good Christian, you need to live your life like mine. Like, that's doing exactly what religion did, which means the like alternative that people were getting from spirituality is something they're not able to access. The other thing you get from CO is the idea that like harms are going to be symmetric. That's ridiculous. I think it's more likely you're going to hold people accountable when you just have less people to hold accountable. I think Becky is very clear on that. Like, numerically, it's just harder to do the tracking and tracing that like you're getting from CO. You probably can't do that because there's just a lot more people with an influx of information online, thousands of TikToks, of YouTube videos and stuff like that. Comparatively, at least, I think it's easier to hold churches accountable. Most governments require them now to register as societies because of all the harms CO talks about came because of things like radicalization and stuff like that. So it's easier to hold them accountable. The other thing on exploitation being symmetrical, I don't think that's true. There's more incentive to exploit in their side of the world. Fine, even if it's symmetric, it's a lot more in their side of the world because you're looking to make money. Your livelihood, the reason why you're famous is because people are clicking your video. So you're probably going to want to like use faith and use the fact that someone is afraid of going to hell against them, because that's what's giving you money. That's what's making sure you get more clicks. I think comparatively, at least, it's a lot worse. Even more, you're competing with a lot more people, right? Because there's a rise of people existing within social media. So you're probably going to use even more exploitative mechanisms. Like, it has to be a comparative debate. They talk about, I'll take in a second. They talk about accessibility. I think the problem here is we already tell you why accessibility is not necessary. We tell you the comparative of having a personal relationship can still exist for members of the LGBTQIA community and stuff like that. But secondly, they already concede that religions are changing. Religions are responding to society. We've seen this with examples like the Catholic Church, with how Islam is like being a lot more, I guess, inclusive of like women and women's needs, things to drive, things like not needing a mahram to tell you what to do. Like, all of that is happening because religion is responding to society, which they concede to. So it's not true that a lot of these groups are going to be locked out. I think it's reasonable to assume that as the longer religion exists and religion wants more people to come to God, it's increasingly moving away from more doctrine, meaning more people are probably able to access religion anyway. But fine, let's accept that these TikToks are the only way people will be able to get this access to spirituality and access to religion. There's a reason why this is not going to be successful. First, it doesn't provide an alternative to religion. There's a reason why Muslims go to madrasa classes, why Catholics go for catechism, because of the society you've grown in. They all agree how indoctrinating society has been in making you believe certain things, like self-interest and like acquisition of profit through capitalism, things like growing up with an awful government, so always connecting leadership with awful things. That means like you've grown up seeing these things forever. The only way I can truly believe anything alternate to that is through a huge amount of like alternate indoctrination. That's why you go to church, you go to these classes. I'm not going to watch 30 seconds of a like TikTok clip and think, oh, suddenly my life is changed, I want to give my life to Christ. That's ridiculous. It doesn't provide any viable alternative.
Right.
Probably going to pass through this video like all the thousands of other videos they see on TikTok. Opening.
CG is just a third up team, because individual spirituality happens when millions of influencers show you how you can individually find your spirituality outside traditional institutions and just choose what fits on our side.
That's not true. Influencer spirituality will require you to live life like this person, because this person is telling you this is what it means to be spiritual, this is what I've done, this is what my life looks like. Spirituality, on the other end, is a very personal relationship you have with God. I think that's very clear. I'm like tired of repeating it. The other thing they talk about is vulnerable groups. I already tell you how vulnerable groups have some amount of solace, but Becky talks to you about why, on principle, in their side of the world, like weaponizing or commercializing faith and the power of faith is harmful. And this is a better principle than what you get from like OG in terms of identity, because we've seen the harms of commercializing faith. We've seen people believe in people like Mackenzie telling them that if you starve, you'll go to heaven. And we've seen the impact that has had. Or can't say, oh, you will see this and opt out and you'll know it's a bad thing. Like, people don't, because like they've said, these are vulnerable groups that have no alternative. This is a person that's looking to make money from this. It's their, like, probably their only source of income. They are competing with thousands of other people, so they probably want to do as much as they can to exploit you. That's harmful. Proud to propose.
Thank you very much, Government Whip. We call the opposition whip to close the debate. Here.
Hi, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, please, you are audible.
Thank you. That's great. Okay. I will accept POIs verbally. Yeah. At any point in time, I welcome POIs all the time. Yeah. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Guys, life has no meaning. Life is the most functionless and meaningless thing one can possibly walk into. You are not born with a set purpose or a set of rules that allow you to achieve whatever that purpose is. It is uniquely different from being a table that is born with an instrumental value, and when it ceases to fulfill that purpose, it is now no longer valuable. Human beings have the capacity and have the sole responsibility of consistently determining their own value. Why is this important? It is that the pursuit of life has always been predicated on that ability to attain existential value for yourself. So everything we weigh up and understand in this debate has to be instrumental to that. That is to say, religion and doctrines don't have an intrinsic value. They have an instrumental value insofar as their capacity to allow people to access and achieve meaning. Their failure to do so means that they cease to have a unique purpose. And we know that religion and spirituality has this instrumental value because even if you want to look at Christianity and the doctrines and books in the Bible that have been dropped over the last 1,000 or so years for the very purpose of adapting it to be more achievable for people, is something that shows you that this is uniquely important for that purpose. We reject the entirety of the Gov's bench push to suggest that there's an intrinsic value to these systems. Secondary to that, where does spirituality fit into this? Because I think it's something very important here. It is not only the idea, and Rea already tells you this, it is not only the idea that one person has a prescribed idea of how you're going to live your life. We're assuming you're opting into spirituality because of the understanding that different people find different ways of achieving meaning in their lives. That is to say, even though you will be practicing it in your own way and doing things in your own time and shape, it is still more than open for you to engage with how other people do things and see if you can ascribe something from that. This is, at least for me, akin to the Gym Talk community, where people like Jeff Nippert and Mike Israetel have a wide variety of different ways of doing things, and I'm more than fine with learning about those different things. But when I apply it and when I do it, I take away what gives me meaning or what functions well for me. I think it's incredibly dehumanizing to assume stupidity on the part of consumers, which is what the entirety of Gov has been doing. That is the problem within this debate. Few things that we told you that still don't get a response. One, we told you that this new age integration of spiritualism is important. Rea takes you through the various phases that religion has gone in the 21st century in its evolution. And that kind of evolution is something that now has led to this community of influencer spiritualism that is akin to the natural evolution that allows more people to be integrated into it. Religions like my own, were not really a religion, but African tradition, where there's no set scripture, relies on the usage of communication to pass information from generation to generation, as a generation that's more aggressively integrated in social media now more than ever, having a TikToker to speak to me about African traditions and the kind of values that they have and the mechanisms behind them becomes something that's valuable and interesting to me. Secondly, she spoke about the democratization of religion, that it now no longer has to be a centered institution in how it functions and there's greater variety. This is important for people's ability to find their meaning. Thirdly, she told you about how this decreases the concentration of wealth and creates fiscal accountability. The only response we get is there's far too many influencers for us to hold all of them accountable, which is borderline nonsensical. It's not like all of them will commit transgressions at once and we need to hold all of them accountable. Much like there's thousands, if not millions of influencers that all get their day in the court of cancel culture by virtue of the purpose that when one person screws up, their audience holds them accountable. And the next step evolves, and that's the process that continues. I'll take a POI a bit later. With that being said, quickly taking OG out of this debate, because we think all of their arguments around clickbaiting, commercialization, and the dilution to make it palatable are things that are not intrinsic to social media, but rather are intrinsic to the desire to capture people's attention instead. And that desire to capture attention uniquely exists within the church as well, and within spiritual and religious institutions. That's why they've consistently been pervasive. Pastors have been consistently polarizing in the past because they want to have new ways of luring people in. Commercialization has existed for decades and generations, and dilution to make something palatable not only has historically existed, but moreover, we think it is fine, right? Because religion and spirituality has an instrumental value to be beneficial to people. So even if it is being made palatable, that's perfectly fine so long as it maximizes people's access to it. Before I engage with CG, sure, I'll take you guys. CG.
You can't claim that people being exploited on the basis of their faith by white men is bad, then turn around and say black queer women doing it on social media platforms is good. It's either exploitation is bad or it's not. We cannot commercialize on vulnerabilities and justify it.
Few things, and I feel like the problem we're struggling with is that we're just not listening to each other here. And this is where I'm going to engage with the CG case. One, the exploitation is not universally the same. The online nature of these influencers means that the accountability is a lot easier, not only by virtue of you being able to track their transactions and hold them accountable, or even platforms being able to ban harmful content from them, but the secondary aspect to it is that there's counter opinions available globally that you can subscribe to as well. That is the situation there. Second thing about the entirety of the CG case, nothing they give you in their counterfactual is mutually exclusive with influencer spiritualism. You can read the Bible on your own, you can have your own candles and have your own personal practices while simultaneously watching stuff on TikTok. You're not going to die if you choose one as opposed to the other. They needed to show you why it necessarily needs to be this way. Second thing they tell you here is the idea that these influencers will tell you what to do and what to buy. We already told you why that's not a real thing. They then give you this idea that, access shouldn't be easy because easy things need to have value. We don't care about this, right? The value that you're able to derive is insofar as you're able to interact with it. And they concede here that religion has been evolving to be more inclusive. This necessarily means they've been lowering barriers to entry for people to achieve meaning. So even by their own logic, there's a desire to make this accessible. Thirdly, they tell you here is the idea that religion is growing to be more inclusive to people in modern times, which I've already touched on, but it is growing via these online platforms. They're not mutually exclusive. They fail to engage with us. This debate has to go to CO.
Thank you very much, Upwhip. Panel. Speakers, please excuse the panel as we go into deliberation and come back to you in about 15 minutes.
Could I just create for you a breakout room so you just keep everything to Zoom?
Yes, please do that.
Okay, so I've opened the breakout room so you can just definitely join. Can you see the room on your end?
No, I don't see it.
I can just not move you directly. So I'm gonna move to deliberation. Okay, I don't know which other person was judging. I could also move them. Methane based observing. Maybe speaking. Any other judge?